Letter 40 of Evelina. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elizabeth Klett. Evelina by Fanny Burney. Letter 40. Evelina to the Reverend Mr. Villars, London, June 6th. Once more, my dearest Sir, I write to you from this great city. Yesterday morning, with the truest concern, I quitted the dear inhabitants of Howard Grove, and most impatiently shall I count the days till I see them again. Lady Howard and Mrs. Mirvan took leave of me with the most flattering kindness; but indeed I knew not how to part with Maria, whose own apparent sorrow redoubled mine. She made me promise to send her a letter every post, and I shall write to her with the same freedom, and almost the same confidence, you allow me to make use of to yourself. The Captain was very civil to me, but he wrangled with poor Madame Duval to the last moment, and taking me aside, just before we got into the chaise, he said, "Harkee, Miss Anville, I've a favour for to ask of you, which is this, that you will write us word how the old gentlewoman finds herself, when she sees it was all a trick, and what the French lubber says to it, and all about it." I answered that I would obey him, though I was very little pleased with the commission, which to me was highly improper; but he will either treat me as an informer, or make me a party in his frolic. As soon as we drove away, Madame Duval, with much satisfaction, exclaimed, "Dieu merci, we've got off at last. I'm sure I never desire to see that place again. It's a wonder I've got away alive, for I believe I've had the worst luck ever was known, from the time I set my foot upon the threshold. I wish I'd never gone. Besides, into the bargain, it's the most dullest place in all Christendom. There's never no diversions, nor nothing at all." Then she bewailed Monsieur Du Bois, concerning whose adventures she continued to make various conjectures during the rest of our journey. When I asked her what part of London she should reside in, she told me that Mr. Branghton was to meet us at an inn, and would conduct us to a lodging. Accordingly, we proceeded to a house in Bishopsgate Street, and were led by a waiter into a room where we found Mr. Branghton. He received us very civilly, but seemed rather surprised at seeing me, saying, "Why, I didn't think of your bringing Miss. However, she's very welcome." "I'll tell you how it was," said Madame Duval. "You must know I've a mind to take the girl to Paris, that she may see something of the world, and improve herself a little. Besides, I've another reason, that you and I will talk more about. But do you know, that meddling old parson, as I've told you of, would not let her go. However, I'm resolved I'll be even with him, for I shall take her on with me, without saying never a word more to nobody." I started at this intimation, which very much surprised me; but I am very glad she has discovered her intention, as I shall be carefully upon my guard not to venture from town with her. Mr. Branghton then hoped we had passed our time agreeably in the country. "Oh, Lord, cousin," cried she, "I've been the miserablest creature in the world. I'm sure all the horses in London shan't drag me into the country again of one while. Why, how do you think I've been served? Only guess." "Indeed, cousin, I can't pretend to do that." "Why, then, I'll tell you. Do you know I've been robbed? That is, the villain would have robbed me if only he could, only I'd secured all my money." "Why, then, cousin, I think your loss can't have been very great." "Oh, Lord, you don't know what you're saying. You're talking in the unthinkingest manner in the world. Why, it was all along of not having no money that I met with that misfortune." "How's that, cousin? I don't see what great misfortune you can have met with, if you'd secured all your money." "That's because you don't know nothing of the matter, for there the villain came to the chaise, and because we hadn't got nothing to give him, though he'd no more right to our money than the man in the moon, yet, do you know, he fell into the greatest passion you ever see, and abused me in such a manner, and put me in a ditch, and got a rope o' purpose to hang me, and I'm sure if that wasn't misfortune enough, why, I don't know what is." "That is a hard case indeed, cousin; but why don't you go to Justice Fielding?" "Oh, as to that, I'm going to him directly; but only first I want to see Monsieur Du Bois; for the oddest thing of all is, that he has wrote to me, and never said nothing of where he is, nor what's become of him, nor nothing else." "Monsieur Du Bois? Why, he's at my house at this very time." "Monsieur Du Bois? At your house? Well, I declare, this is the surprisingest part of all.
However, I assure you that he might have come for me, as well as you, considering what I have gone through on his account; for to tell you the truth, it was all along of him that I met with that accident; so I don't take it very kindly of him, I promise you." "Well, but, cousin, tell me some of the particulars of this affair." "As to the particulars, I am sure they'd make your hair stand on end to hear them. However, the beginning of it all was through the fault of Monsieur Du Bois; but I'll assure you he may take care of himself in future, since he don't so much as come to see if I'm dead or alive. But there, I went for him to a justice of peace, and rode out all the way, and did everything in the world, and was used worser than a dog, and all for the sake of serving of him; and now you see he don't so much, well, I was a fool for my pains. However, he may get somebody else to be treated so another time, for if he's taken up every day in the week, I'll never go after him no more."
This occasioned an explanation, in the course of which Madame Duval, to her utter amazement, heard that Monsieur Du Bois had never left London during her absence; nor did Mr. Branghton believe that he had ever been to the Tower, or met with any kind of accident. Almost instantly the whole truth of the transaction seemed to rush upon her mind, and her wrath was inconceivably violent. She asked me 1,000 questions in a breath, but fortunately was too vehement to attend to my embarrassment, which must otherwise have betrayed my knowledge of the deceit. Revenge was her first wish, and she vowed she would go the next morning to Justice Fielding, and inquire what punishment she might lawfully inflict upon the Captain for his assault. I believe we were an hour at Bishopsgate Street before poor Madame Duval could allow anything to be mentioned but her own story. At any length, however, Mr. Branghton told her that Monsieur Du Bois and all his own family were waiting for her at his house. A hackney coach was then called, and we proceeded to Snow Hill. Mr. Branghton's house is small and inconvenient, though his shop, which takes in all the ground floor, is large and commodious. I believe I told you before that he was a silversmith. We were conducted up 2 pairs of stairs; for the dining room, Mr. Branghton told us, was let. His 2 daughters, their brother, Monsieur Du Bois, and a young man, were at tea. They had waited some time for Madame Duval, but I found they had not any expectation that I should accompany her; and the young ladies, I believe, were rather more surprised than pleased when I made my appearance, for they seemed hurt that I should see their apartment. Indeed, I would willingly have saved them that pain had it been in my power. The first person who saw me was Monsieur Du Bois. "Ah, mon Dieu!" exclaimed he, "voilà mademoiselle!" "Goodness!" cried young Branghton, "if there isn't Miss!" "Lord, so there is!" said Miss Polly. "Well, I'm sure I should never have dreamed of Miss's coming." "Nor I neither, I'm sure," cried Miss Branghton, "or else I would not have been in this room to see her. I'm quite ashamed about it, only not thinking of seeing anybody but my aunt. However, Tom, it's all your fault, for you know very well I wanted to borrow Mr. Smith's room, only you were so grumpy you would not let me." "Lord, what signifies?" said her brother. "I dare be sworn Miss has been up 2 pair of stairs before now. Hadn't she, Miss?" I begged that I might not give them the least disturbance, and assured them that I had not any choice in regard to what room we sat in. "Well," said Miss Polly, "when you come next, Miss, we'll have Mr. Smith's room, and it's a very pretty one, and only up 1 pair of stairs, and nicely furnished and everything." "To say the truth," said Miss Branghton, "I thought that my cousin would not, upon any account, have come to town in the summer time, for it's not at all the fashion. So, to be sure, thinks I, she'll stay till September, when the playhouses open." This was my reception, which I believe you will not call a very cordial one. Madame Duval, who, after having severely reprimanded Monsieur Du Bois for his negligence, was just entering upon the story of her misfortunes, now wholly engaged the company. Monsieur Du Bois listened to her with a look of the utmost horror, repeatedly lifting up his eyes and hands, and exclaiming, "Au ciel, quel barbare!" The young ladies gave her the most earnest attention; but their brother and the young man kept a broad grin upon their faces during the whole recital. She was, however, too much engaged to observe them; but when she mentioned having been tied in a ditch, young Branghton, no longer able to contain himself, burst into a loud laugh, declaring that he had never heard anything so funny in his life. His laugh was heartily re-echoed by his friend. The Miss Branghtons could not resist the example, and poor Madame Duval, to her extreme amazement, was absolutely overpowered and stopped by the violence of their mirth. For some minutes the room seemed quite in an uproar.